The sandstorm had swallowed the valley whole, turning midday into a sepia nightmare where visibility measured in arms lengths rather than miles. Inside the operations center at Forward Operating Base Keating, Major Castellano stood motionless before the tactical display, watching 8 red triangles converge on a single blue dot. The radio crackled with gunfire and desperate voices. Broken arrow, this is Viper 2-1. We are being overrun, I repeat, we are being overrun. The transmission dissolved into static, then screaming, then nothing. Castellanos felt his jaw tighten. 23 Marines, cut off in the Tangi Valley, surrounded by an enemy force at least 10 times their size. Every available asset was grounded. The Apache gunships sat chained to the tarmac, their rotors motionless against regulations that prohibited flight in zero-visibility conditions. The F-16s at Bagram had already turned back twice, their pilots reporting instrument failure and complete spatial disorientation. Even the AC-130 Spectre, that angel of death that ruled the Afghan night, couldn't penetrate the swirling wall of sand and dust that had transformed the Hindu Kush into an impenetrable fortress. The Situation Room had fallen into a terrible silence, the kind that precedes catastrophic loss, when every officer present understands they're about to watch good men die and can do absolutely nothing to prevent it. Castellanos had already begun mentally composing the letters he'd have to write to 23 families. Then the ready room door opened, and she walked in. Captain Rizat, Revenant, Okonkwo moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd already made her decision and wasn't seeking permission. Her flight suit was faded from too many combat sorties, her dark skin still bearing the faint scars from an ejection over Kandahar 3 years prior. She carried her helmet under one arm, its worn surface decorated with 27 small crosses, each one representing a close air support mission where she'd pulled friendly forces from the fire. "Sir, Hog 23 is spun up and ready," she said, her Nigerian accent softened by years stateside but still distinct. "I'm going in." The room erupted. Lieutenant Colonel Vance was the first to object, stepping between Okonkwo and the exit. "Negative, Captain, you heard the weather brief. We've got 0/0 conditions out there, sustained winds at 40 knots with gusts to 60 and visibility under an eighth of a mile. The Apache won't fly, the Vipers won't fly, and you sure as hell aren't flying that slow-moving titanium bathtub into a sandstorm." Okonkwo didn't flinch. She'd heard every insult about the A-10 Thunderbolt II, every criticism about its age, its speed, its vulnerability. The Warthog, they called it, the flying gun. Ugly, slow, outdated. But she knew something these fast jet pilots didn't. Sometimes the oldest tools were the right tools. Sometimes you needed something built to take punishment, to fly low and slow, to see the battlefield not as coordinates on a screen, but as actual human beings fighting and dying in the dirt. Castellano studied her face, searching for doubt and finding none. Revenant had earned her call sign the hard way, coming back from missions that should have killed her, returning from scenarios that had no right to end in anything but a smoking crater. She'd been shot down over hostile territory and walked out 17 days later with 3 rescued pilots in tow. She'd landed an A-10 with one engine gone, half a wing missing, and hydraulics leaking across the Afghan desert like a blood trail. The woman standing before him wasn't reckless. She was something far more dangerous, she was certain. "The Marines are 5 minutes from being overrun," Okonkwo continued, her voice level but insistent. "Maybe less. By the time this storm clears, we'll be recovering bodies instead of extracting personnel. I can get there. The Hog was built for this." Vance scoffed, looking to Castellanos for support. "This is insane." "She'll be flying blind, practically nap of the earth in a sandstorm, with enemy AAA active in the area. This isn't bravery, sir, it's suicide." But Castellanos was looking at the tactical display again, watching those red triangles tighten around the blue dot like a noose. He thought about the last transmission, the fear in that Marine's voice, the way it had cut off mid-sentence. He thought about the families, the folded flags, the graveside eulogies. Then he thought about the woman standing in front of him, calm as stone, asking for the chance to do the impossible. "How confident are you, Captain?" he asked quietly. Okonkwo met his eyes. "I've flown through worse, sir. The A-10 systems are designed for low-altitude, high-threat environments. I don't need visibility to find them. I need coordinates and a corridor. Give me both and I'll bring those Marines home." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Castellanos nodded once, sharp and final. "Get to your bird, Captain. You have 30 minutes to get in position. We'll mark the friendly position with infrared strobes and push you targeting data as we get it. But understand this clearly. If conditions deteriorate further, you abort immediately. I'm not trading 24 lives for 23. Acknowledged." Revenant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something like gratitude mixed with grim determination. "Acknowledged, sir. Hog 2-3 is Winchester and on the move." She turned and walked out, her bootsteps echoing in the sudden stillness. The door closed behind her and Vance exploded. "You're sending her to die. That storm isn't clearing and you know it. We should be organizing a ground relief column, not launching a suicide mission." Castellanos kept his eyes on the display, watching the blue dot flicker weakly. "Ground relief is 40 minutes out minimum, probably longer in these conditions. Those Marines don't have 40 minutes. Outside, the sandstorm howled like something alive and malevolent, reducing the world to shades of brown and gray. Revenant crossed the tarmac toward where her A-10 sat waiting, its twin turbofan engines already spooling to life, maintainers scrambling to complete final checks. Technical Sergeant Morrison, her crew chief, was shouting something over the wind, but the words were torn away before they could reach her. She gave him a thumbs up, and he returned it with obvious reluctance, his face tight with worry. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was an ugly aircraft by any aesthetic measure. It looked like something designed by committee, by people who prioritized function over form so completely that beauty never entered the equation. The fuselage was thick and stubby, the engines mounted high on the rear to protect them from ground fire, the cockpit surrounded by a titanium bathtub that could stop 23 rounds. Beneath the nose, the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon protruded like the stinger of some enormous wasp, a 7-barrel monster that fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 65 per second. It was a gun with an airplane built around it, and it had been designed for exactly one purpose: close air support in high-threat environments. Revenant climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, her hands moving through pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. The instruments glowed softly in the dim light: altitude indicator, airspeed, artificial horizon, all the tools she'd need to navigate through the storm by instruments alone. She pulled on her helmet, adjusted the oxygen mask, and keyed the radio. "Tower, Hog 2-3 requesting immediate takeoff clearance." There was a pause longer than normal, and she could imagine the controller looking to his supervisor, questioning the sanity of what was happening. Then, "Hog 2-3, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 27. Winds 310 at 45 gusting to 60. Visibility 1/8 mile. Ceiling indefinite obscured. Altimeter 2982. Godspeed, Captain." Revenant pushed the throttles forward, feeling the Warthog respond with its characteristic growl, more tractor than thoroughbred. The aircraft lumbered forward, accelerating slowly, needing every inch of runway to claw its way into the air. At 120 knots, she pulled back, and the A-10 lifted off reluctantly, immediately swallowed by the brown murk. The world outside disappeared. She was in the sandstorm now, committed, with 23 lives depending on her and no way out except forward. The cockpit became her entire universe, a small bubble of light and instrumentation surrounded by chaos. Sand hammered against the canopy with the sound of distant gunfire, the aircraft bucking and shuddering in the turbulence. Revenant's eyes scanned the instruments in a constant pattern, cross-checking altitude against terrain elevation, airspeed against angle of attack, artificial horizon against her inner sense of balance. Outside, there was nothing: no ground, no sky, no reference points of any kind. Just swirling brown obscurity that could be hiding mountains or valleys or nothing at all. She checked her GPS coordinates and began a slow turn toward the Tangi Valley, her fingers light on the stick, making tiny corrections to keep the wings level. The A-10 was stable in the turbulence, its straight wings and low wing loading making it less susceptible to sudden upsets than the sleeker, faster jets. It was built to be flown low, to absorb punishment, to keep flying when everything else would have fallen from the sky. At 1,000 feet above ground level, she leveled off and pushed the throttles up slightly, accelerating to 250 knots, as fast as she dared in these conditions. The navigation system showed 30 kilometers to the target area, about 7 minutes at current speed. 7 minutes that might as well have been 7 hours. The radio in her helmet crackled to life. Hog 2-3, this is Viper 2-1, do you copy? The voice was hoarse, breathless, punctuated by the sharp crack of nearby gunfire. Revenant keyed her mic. Viper 2-1, Hog 2-3, I copy you 5x5. Understand you're in contact and require immediate close air support. Affirmative, Hog. We've got enemy forces inside 50 meters on 3 sides, heavy machine gun fire from the North Ridge, RPGs from the east, and approximately 80 to 100 dismounts closing from the south. We've taken 11 casualties, 4 urgent surgical, and we're down to maybe 20 minutes of ammunition. Please advise your ETA. Revenant glanced at her navigation display. 6 minutes to your position, Viper. Pop infrared strobes on your northern perimeter so I can confirm your position. Be coming in from the west, danger close, so keep your heads down. There was a pause, then a different voice, older, calmer despite the circumstances. Hog 2-3, this is Viper 2-1 actual. Understand you're inbound in zero visibility conditions. Can you confirm you have visual on the target area? It was a polite way of asking if she was insane. Revenant allowed herself a thin smile. Negative visual, Viper actual. I'll be working off coordinates and infrared. Mark your position now. 5 minutes out, and the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying, the turbulence increasing, the visibility decreasing to something that couldn't even be called visibility anymore. Revenant descended to 700 feet, then 600, the radar altimeter counting down the shrinking distance between her aircraft and the mountains she couldn't see. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to climb, to get away from the ground, to find clear air and safety. She ignored those instincts. The Marines below didn't have the option of climbing away from danger. They were trapped in it, surrounded by it, dying in it. The least she could do was join them in the chaos and make it slightly less one-sided. At 4 minutes out, her targeting pod picked up the first infrared strobe, a bright star in the otherwise uniform heat signature of the valley. She locked onto it, her aircraft's computer calculating angles and distances, feeding her information about wind drift and ballistic trajectories. More strobes appeared, defining a rough perimeter maybe 200 meters across. Inside that perimeter, human heat signatures clustered in defensive positions. Outside it, dozens more signatures, moving, flanking, preparing to assault. Revenant descended to 500 feet, so low she was practically skimming the ridgeline she couldn't see. Her hands were steady on the controls, her breathing slow and controlled. Fear was useless here. Doubt was fatal. There was only the aircraft, the instruments, and the job. She armed the GAU-8, feeling the familiar hum as the cannon systems came online. The Avenger carried 1,100 rounds of 30 ammunition, a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive incendiary rounds. At her current range and altitude, she could put 65 of those rounds per second into a target area the size of a car. The enemy fighters on that ridgeline were about to learn what it meant to be on the receiving end of the most powerful aircraft-mounted gun ever built. Viper 2-1, Hog 2-3 is 1 minute out. Confirm friendly positions marked with IR strobes and no friendlies north of your northern perimeter. Confirmed, Hog. Northern perimeter is clear, engage at will. The targeting reticle settled over the northern ridgeline where her sensors showed muzzle flashes and heat signatures clustered around what looked like a heavy machine gun position. Revenant took a breath, steadied the aircraft, and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared to life with a sound that defied description, somewhere between a buzzsaw and the voice of God, a deep, resonating brrrrrrt that shook the entire airframe. 30 rounds left the cannon in the first half-second burst, depleted uranium penetrators screaming downrange at 3,500 feet per second. Revenant couldn't see the impact through the sandstorm, but her sensors told the story. The heat signatures on the ridgeline simply ceased to exist, erased in a fraction of a second. The machine gun position vanished. The enemy fighters around it vanished. Nothing organic could survive what had just arrived from the sky. She banked right, her aircraft groaning under the G-forces, sand hammering the canopy like gravel against glass. The eastern flank showed RPG teams, 3 of them, heat signatures huddled behind rocks with the distinctive thermal bloom of rocket-propelled grenades. Revenant adjusted her angle, compensating for wind drift in the aircraft's velocity, and fired again. Another burst, another 2 seconds of devastation, and the RPG teams became memories. The Warthog's cannon could fire armor-piercing rounds designed to destroy tanks. Against unarmored personnel, it was beyond overkill. It was biblical. On the ground, Staff Sergeant Kowalski pressed himself against the rocky outcrop and watched in awe as the world around him exploded. He couldn't see the aircraft, couldn't hear it over the storm and the gunfire, but he could sure as hell hear that cannon. The sound came first, that distinctive BRRRRRT that every infantryman who'd served in Afghanistan knew and loved. Then the impacts, a rolling thunder of destruction that walked across the enemy positions like the footsteps of an angry giant. The machine gun fire from the north simply stopped, cut off mid-burst. The RPG teams on the eastern flank disappeared in a series of massive explosions. Kowalski keyed his radio, shouting to be heard over the chaos. Hog, Viper 2-1, beautiful, beautiful shooting. Enemy forces are breaking contact on the north and east. We still have approximately 60 dismounts advancing from the south, danger close, within 70 meters of our position. Revenant was already turning, her aircraft completing a tight orbit that brought her around for another pass. The southern approach was the problem. The enemy fighters were too close to the Marine positions, close enough that any error, any slight miscalculation would result in friendly casualties. She needed precision here, not area bombardment. She switched from the cannon to her Maverick missiles, selecting one of the AGM-65 slung under her wing. The infrared seeker locked onto a cluster of heat signatures advancing up a ravine toward the Marine positions. 70 meters. Close, but not too close. She pickled off the missile and watched it streak away into the brown murk. The explosion was massive, the Maverick's 250-pound warhead detonating among the enemy fighters and turning the ravine into a kill zone. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition and grenades cooked off. Revenant fired a second Maverick at another cluster, then a third, methodically dismantling the enemy assault from a position of complete aerial dominance. It didn't matter that she couldn't see them with her eyes. Her sensors saw them. Her weapons found them. And they died, scattered by high explosives and shrapnel, their assault broken before it could reach the Marine lines. She fired a fourth Maverick, then switched back to the cannon for mopping up operations, targeting individual heat signatures that were trying to retreat. The A-10's loiter time was phenomenal compared to faster jets. She could stay in the area for over an hour if needed, circling endlessly, providing continuous fire support, making it absolutely clear that any enemy fighter foolish enough to remain in the area would not survive the experience. Below, the Marines had stopped shooting. There was nothing left to shoot at. The enemy forces had broken completely, those who survived fleeing into the storm, abandoning their weapons and wounded, their assault shattered by 6 minutes of close air support delivered by a pilot they couldn't see in an aircraft they never heard coming. Viper 2-1's voice came over the radio, and this time there was something different in it, something that might have been awe. Hog 2-3, Viper 2-1 actual. That was the most incredible display of airmanship and gunnery I have ever witnessed. You just saved 23 lives. How copy? Revenant checked her fuel state and ammunition count. She was Winchester on Mavericks but still had 800 rounds for the cannon and enough fuel for another 40 minutes on station. Solid copy, Viper actual. I'm going to stay overhead until your relief column arrives. Nobody else is getting close to your position while I'm up here. She continued her orbit, invisible in the storm, a guardian angel made of titanium and depleted uranium. The sandstorm began to clear after another 20 minutes, the visibility improving from impossible to merely terrible. Revenant descended to 300 feet, low enough now that she could actually see the ground through breaks in the murk. The battlefield below looked like something from another era, scattered weapons and equipment, impact craters from her Mavericks, long gouges in the earth where her cannon rounds had torn through rock and dirt. The Marine positions were clearly visible, a tight defensive circle of hastily constructed fortifications. As she passed overhead, she saw figures emerge from cover, looking up, waving. She rocked her wings in acknowledgement, that ancient gesture of recognition between aviator and ground forces, then pulled up into a climbing turn. Her fuel was getting low now, time to head back to base. Viper 2-1, Hog 2-3 is RTB for fuel and rearm. Ground relief column should be reaching your position in approximately 15 minutes. Stay safe down there. Roger, Hog and Captain, thank you. Seriously, you saved our lives today. Revenant didn't respond immediately. What was there to say? This was the job. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd volunteered for, what she'd chosen over every other possible path her life could have taken. Just doing what the Hog does best, Viper. See you at the debrief. She turned for home, emerging from the sandstorm into clear air, the sudden transition from brown chaos to blue sky almost shocking in its abruptness. Behind her, the Tangi Valley receded into the distance, still shrouded in its veil of dust and sand. Ahead, the mountains of the Hindu Kush stretched to the horizon, ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of violence and survival playing out in their shadows. The flight back to Fob Keating took 18 minutes. Revenant used the time to run through post-combat checks, verifying that her aircraft hadn't sustained any damage she hadn't noticed during the engagement. Everything looked good. The Warthog had taken her into hell and brought her back without complaint, just as it had dozens of times before. As she approached the base, the radio came alive with congratulations and questions. Everyone who'd been monitoring the tactical net wanting to know how she'd done it, how she'd flown through zero visibility conditions and delivered precise fires, danger close to friendly forces. She kept her answers short, professional, focusing on the tactical details rather than the feat of airmanship. The tower cleared her for a straightened approach, and she brought the A-10 down smoothly, the main gear chirping against the runway, the nose wheel settling gently. She taxied back to her revetment where Sergeant Morrison and his maintenance crew were waiting, their faces split with enormous grins. Revenant shut down the engines, completed her post-flight checklist, and climbed down from the cockpit. The heat hit her immediately, the Afghan sun turning the tarmac into a griddle despite the recent sandstorm. Morrison approached with his clipboard, ready to begin the post-flight inspection, but he was smiling too hard to maintain his usual professional demeanor. "Ma'am, we were monitoring the radio. That was unfucking believable. Begging your pardon for the language." Revenant allowed herself a small smile, removing her helmet and running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. "Just another day in the Hog, Sergeant. How's she look?" Morrison walked around the aircraft, his trained eyes scanning for damage, but the A-10 looked essentially pristine. A few new dings in the armor plating from debris, some sand abrasion on the leading edges, nothing that wouldn't be fixed with an hour of maintenance. "She's beautiful, ma'am. Not a scratch worth mentioning." "This old bird just keeps taking care of you, doesn't she?" "That she does." Revenant patted the aircraft's nose, feeling the still warm titanium under her palm. "Get her cleaned up and rearmed. I want to be ready if those Marines need us again." "Will do, ma'am." Revenant walked toward the operations center, her flight suit sticking to her back in the heat, her legs slightly unsteady after the adrenaline come-down. Around her, personnel stopped what they were doing to watch her pass, word having already spread about what had happened in the Tangi Valley. She could feel their eyes on her, could sense the shift in how they looked at her. The debriefing took 2 hours. Major Castellanos, Lieutenant Colonel Vance, the intelligence officers, the air traffic controllers, everyone who'd been involved in the mission crowded into the room to hear her account. She walked them through it step by step, the instrument approach in zero visibility, The coordination with ground forces, the targeting solutions, the weapon employment, all of it laid out in precise detail. Vance, who tried to stop her from launching, sat in the back and said nothing, his expression unreadable. When she finished, Castellanos leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. Captain Okonkwo, I've been in this business for 22 years, and I have never seen anything like what you did today. The Marines are putting you in for a Distinguished Flying Cross, and I'm endorsing it without reservation. You flew a mission that every manual says is impossible, and you made it look routine. Revenant shifted uncomfortably. She'd never been good with praise, preferred to let her actions speak rather than accept accolades. Sir, with respect, any A-10 pilot in the squadron could have done the same thing. The Hog makes it possible. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The aircraft made it possible, yes, but the aircraft didn't fly itself. It took hands that knew how to read instruments in total disorientation, eyes that could interpret thermal imagery through the chaos of a sandstorm, and a mind that could calculate angles and trajectories while flying 50 feet per second through terrain she couldn't see. That night, Revenant sat alone in her quarters, a sparse room containing a cot, a footlocker, and a small desk covered with paperwork and photos. She was writing emails, the usual post-mission routine, when someone knocked on her door. "Come in." The door opened to reveal Staff Sergeant Kowalski, still in his dusty combat gear, his face drawn with exhaustion but his eyes bright. He carried something wrapped in cloth. "Captain Okonkwo, I'm Kowalski, Viper 2-1. I wanted to thank you in person. You saved my life today. You saved all of us." Revenant stood, suddenly uncomfortable. She'd faced down enemy fire with calm professionalism, but genuine gratitude always made her uneasy. "Sergeant, you don't need to thank me. I was doing my job." "With respect, ma'am, you did a hell of a lot more than your job. We were dead. We'd accepted it. And then you showed up in that storm like something out of a myth, and suddenly we weren't dead anymore. That's not just doing your job. That's being a goddamn miracle worker." He held out the wrapped bundle. "The boys wanted you to have this. It's not much, but it's from all of us." Revenant unwrapped the cloth to find a unit patch, Viper 2-1's company insignia, hand-stitched and signed by every member of the team she'd saved. 23 signatures, 23 names, 23 lives that had continued because of 6 minutes of violence delivered from the sky. She felt something catch in her throat and swallowed hard against it. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'll treasure this." "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, how did you learn to fly like that?" "To navigate through conditions where nobody else could see anything." Revenant looked past him, out the small window toward where her A-10 sat on the flight line, silhouetted against the setting sun. "My father was a pilot back in Nigeria. He flew cargo planes into places where there were no proper airports, no navigation aids, just him and his instruments and his instincts. He used to say that the aircraft was just a tool, that real flying happened in here." She tapped her temple. "In your mind, in your ability to build a picture of the world from information instead of sight. He taught me that before I ever sat in a cockpit." "Sounds like a hell of a man." "He was." She didn't elaborate, didn't mention that he died in a crash when she was 16, that his death had driven her to become a pilot herself, to prove that his methods worked, that flying by instinct and information wasn't recklessness but a different kind of precision. Kowalski lingered for a moment, seeming to want to say something more, then simply nodded and left. Revenant sat back down, holding the patch, running her thumb over the stitched signatures. 23 names. 23 people who'd wake up tomorrow because she'd refused to accept the impossible as an excuse. The next morning, word of the mission had spread throughout the entire base. Revenant walked to the flight line for her pre-dawn brief and found herself intercepted repeatedly by soldiers and airmen wanting to shake her hand, to tell her they'd heard about the Tangi Valley, to express something that looked a lot like reverence. It made her deeply uncomfortable. She was a pilot, not a hero. Heroes were Marines holding defensive positions against overwhelming odds. Heroes were medics running through gunfire to reach wounded soldiers. She just flew an airplane, and not even a particularly glamorous one. At the morning brief, the squadron commander, Colonel Rains, called her to the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, as most of you have heard, Captain Okonkwo completed a rather extraordinary mission yesterday. I've asked her to share some insights about flying the hog in extreme conditions. Captain. Revenant stood reluctantly, facing a room full of pilots who suddenly looked at her differently than they had a week ago. Before yesterday, she'd been competent but unremarkable, a solid pilot who flew her missions and went home. Now she was something else, and she wasn't entirely sure she liked it. "There's not much to tell that isn't in the mission report," she began. "The key to flying in zero visibility is trusting your instruments completely. Your eyes will lie to you, your inner ear will lie to you, your instincts will scream at you to do things that will kill you. The instruments tell the truth. Cross-check constantly, verify everything, and fly the aircraft deliberately. The A-10 is stable and forgiving if you respect it." That's really all there is to it. A hand went up, a young lieutenant she didn't know well. "But how did you make those targeting solutions without being able to see the battlefield?" "Sensors," Revenant replied simply. "Thermal imaging, infrared, GPS coordinates from the ground team. You build a mental picture from data streams. The targeting computer does most of the work if you feed it accurate information. The hard part is flying low enough to be effective while maintaining situational awareness through instruments only. That takes practice and a willingness to be uncomfortable." Another hand, a captain from the F-16 squadron. "With respect, Captain, what you did yesterday was more than practice and comfort. You executed danger-close fire missions in conditions that grounded every other asset. That takes something beyond technical skill." Revenant met his eyes, seeing genuine respect there, and decided to be honest. "It takes faith," she said quietly. "Faith in your aircraft, faith in your training, and faith that the mission is worth the risk. Those Marines were dying. Someone had to go. The hog could do it, so I went. Any of you would have done the same in my position." But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. Would they have? Would anyone else have looked at those weather conditions, at that tactical situation, and decided to launch anyway? She liked to think so, but she'd never know for sure. The brief continued, and eventually she returned to her seat, grateful to be out of the spotlight. But throughout the day, the attention continued. Maintenance crews found excuses to walk past her aircraft. Ground personnel asked for photos. Even the base commander, Brigadier General Thornton, made a point of stopping by her revetment to personally thank her for the mission. It was overwhelming, and by late afternoon, Revenant had retreated to the far end of the flight line, where a maintenance hangar provided some shade and solitude. She was sitting on a stack of aircraft tires, drinking water and trying to disappear, when Lieutenant Colonel Vance found her. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets, his expression difficult to read. Revenant stood, expecting a reprimand for abandoning her duties or perhaps another lecture about taking unnecessary risks. Instead, Vance stopped a few feet away and let out a long breath. "I owe you an apology, Captain. I called your plan a suicide mission. I tried to stop you from launching. I was wrong." Revenant blinked, surprised. Vance wasn't known for admitting mistakes. "Sir, you were following regulations and protecting your pilot. That's not wrong." "Maybe not, but I was also scared. Scared of losing an aircraft, scared of losing a pilot, scared of making the decision to send someone into conditions I thought were unsurvivable." "You weren't scared. Or if you were, you didn't let it stop you. You saw what needed to be done and did it, and you saved 23 lives. That's the definition of courage, and I should have recognized it yesterday instead of trying to prevent it." He extended his hand. "You're a hell of a pilot, Okonkwo. One of the best I've ever seen. I'm honored to serve with you." Revenant shook his hand, feeling the firm grip, the genuine respect behind the gesture. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." After Vance left, she sat back down on the tires and let herself breathe. Maybe the attention wasn't entirely terrible. Maybe it was okay to accept recognition for something extraordinary, to let people acknowledge that what had happened in the Tangi Valley was more than routine. Her radio crackled, her personal call sign cutting through the static. "Revenant, this is Ops. We need you in the TOC immediately. We've got another situation developing." She was on her feet instantly, the brief moment of reflection forgotten, replaced by the familiar rush of adrenaline and focus. Whatever was happening, the Marines needed her again. And this time, everyone knew exactly what she was capable of. The Tactical Operations Center was crowded when she arrived, multiple missions being coordinated simultaneously across the Afghan theater. Major Castellanos waved her over to tactical displays showing the Helmand province, an area of operations she knew well from previous deployments. We've got a convoy ambushed on Route 1, about 40 kilometers northwest of here. They're pinned down by a combination of small arms fire and an improvised explosive device that disabled their lead vehicle. 3 wounded, enemy forces in fortified positions on both sides of the road. Fast movers are 20 minutes out, but the convoy commander says they need immediate support. Revenant studied the display, taking in the terrain, the convoy's position, the likely enemy locations. What's the weather like? Clear skies, good visibility, no complications. Castellanos looked at her intently. You don't have to take this one, Captain. You flew a hard mission yesterday, and there are other pilots available. Revenant almost laughed. Yesterday she'd flown through a sandstorm that grounded every other aircraft on base. Today was a perfect flying day by comparison. Sir, with respect, this is exactly the kind of mission the Hog was built for. I'm ready to go. Then you're cleared hot. Hog 2-3 is prepped and armed. Get those soldiers out of there. Revenant double-timed it to the flight line, her mind already running through the mission profile, calculating angles of attack and weapon loadouts. Sergeant Morrison had the ready, fully armed with a fresh combat load. 1,100 rounds for the cannon, 6 Maverick missiles, 2 rocket pods, and electronic countermeasure systems all checked and operational. Figured you'd be flying again today, ma'am, Morrison said with a grin. The Hog's ready to go hunting. She's always ready, Sergeant. That's why we love her. Revenant climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and began her startup sequence. The engines spooled to life with their characteristic whine, and within 3 minutes she was taxiing toward the runway. The tower cleared her immediately, priority traffic, and she was airborne before most pilots would have completed their pre-flight checks. The flight to the ambush site took 12 minutes at 400 knots, the screaming across the Afghan landscape at low altitude. The terrain below was a study in browns and tans, endless rocky desert broken by occasional green valleys where rivers ran and villages clustered. Revenant kept her eyes moving between the cockpit instruments and the world outside, building her situational awareness, preparing for the fight ahead. At 10 kilometers out, she began her descent, dropping to 500 feet above ground level and reducing speed to 250 knots. Her targeting pod locked onto the convoy's position, 3 Humvees arranged in a defensive triangle around the disabled lead vehicle. Smoke rose from multiple locations, evidence of ongoing combat. She keyed the radio. Longbow 6, this is Hog 2-3 inbound your position with full combat load. Understand you're in contact and require immediate fire support. The response was immediate, a voice tight with stress and exhaustion. Hog 2-3, Longbow 6 actual, we're taking fire from fortified positions approximately 200 meters east and west of our location. We have enemy fighters in buildings and behind stone walls, multiple crew-served weapons. We're expending ammunition rapidly and have 3 wounded who need immediate evacuation. Revenant's eyes scanned the area through her targeting pod, the high-resolution imaging revealing exactly what the convoy commander had described. East of the convoy, she could see muzzle flashes from a building's windows, a PKM machine gun crew pouring fire into the American position. West, more fighters behind a stone compound wall, using murder holes to engage while remaining mostly protected. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, designed to catch the convoy in a crossfire with no escape route. Longbow 6, I've got eyes on enemy positions east and west. I'm going to neutralize the eastern position first with cannon fire, then work the western compound with Mavericks. Keep your people's heads down and mark your perimeter with IR strobes. Roger, Hog, marking now. Revenant rolled into her attack run, lining up on the eastern building where the machine gun crew was operating. The targeting reticle settled over the structure's second floor, the ballistics computer calculating lead and elevation automatically. At 1,500 meters, she pressed the trigger, and the GAU-8 cannon roared to life. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. 30-millimeter rounds tore through the building's mud-brick walls as if they were paper, each impact creating explosions of pulverized adobe and dust. The second-floor gun position simply ceased to exist, the machine gun and its crew obliterated in less than 2 seconds of fire. The building's entire front wall collapsed, the structure unable to withstand the kinetic energy of 70 depleted uranium penetrators arriving at supersonic velocity. Revenant pulled up and right, banking hard to come around for the western compound. The fighters there had seen what happened to their comrades and were attempting to abandon their positions, fleeing toward a nearby tree line. She switched to one of her rocket pods and rippled off 6 Hydra rockets, walking the impacts across their escape route. The unguided rockets weren't precision weapons, but they didn't need to be. They saturated the area with high explosives and white phosphorus, creating a wall of fire and fragmentation that caught the fleeing fighters in the open. Through her targeting pod, Revenant watched the heat signatures scatter and fall, the ambush broken completely in less than 90 seconds. Longbow 6, Hog 2-3, both enemy positions neutralized. I'm seeing scattered dismounts fleeing north, but they're no longer a threat to your position. How copy? Solid copy, Hog. That was magnificent shooting. We're securing the area now and preparing to evacuate our wounded. Can you stay overhead while we work? Affirmative. I've got fuel and ammunition for another 45 minutes on station. Nobody else is getting close to you. Revenant climbed to 1,000 feet and established a lazy orbit around the convoy, her sensors scanning for any additional threats. Below, the soldiers emerged from cover and began administering first aid to their wounded, their movements quick and efficient now that the immediate danger had passed. She watched them work, these ground pounders who operated in a world of dirt and bullets and constant danger, and felt a deep respect for what they endured every single day. Her war was measured in minutes and hours, intense bursts of violence followed by relative safety back at base. Their war was constant, 24 hours a day, always exposed, always vulnerable, always aware that any moment might be their last. The medevac helicopter arrived 18 minutes later, a Black Hawk with door gunners that swooped in fast and hard, spending less than 3 minutes on the ground before lifting off with the wounded. The convoy prepared to continue its mission, the disabled Humvee rigged for towing, the soldiers mounted up and ready to move. Hog 2-3, Longbow 6. We're mobile and continuing mission. Thank you for the save. You've got a beer waiting for you next time you're at Camp Leatherneck. Revenant smiled inside her oxygen mask. I'll hold you to that, Longbow. Stay safe out there. She turned for home, the mission complete. Another set of lives saved, another ambush broken. It was becoming a pattern and people were starting to notice. The next several weeks followed a similar rhythm. Revenant flew mission after mission, close air support throughout Helmand and Kandahar provinces, each sortie adding to her growing legend. She broke up Taliban attacks, destroyed enemy fighting positions, provided overwatch for ground operations, and every time she delivered precision fires with a level of skill that seemed almost supernatural. The other pilots in her squadron began calling her the Reaper Queen, a play on her call sign and her uncanny ability to arrive at the exact moment when friendly forces needed her most. Combat camera footage from one of her missions went semi-viral within military circles, showing her executing a gun run so close to friendly troops that the spent casings from her cannon were falling into their fighting positions. The Marines had gone wild, cheering as the enemy position 300 meters away exploded under the weight of 75 rounds of 30 fire. That footage found its way to the Pentagon, to CENTCOM headquarters, to the desks of generals who made decisions about air power employment.